Libya requests U.S. airstrikes against ISIS, the new front in the war on terror. Donald Trump faces backlash from his own party for criticizing a fallen Army captain's family. Pope Francis returns home from World Youth Day, his message about a new humanity. And a brand new chapter for the Vatican press office. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, August 1st, 2016. Good evening from Washington. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Donald Trump is not apologizing for controversial comments he made. He criticized the Muslim parents of a slain American soldier. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
Have you even read the United States Constitution?
Khizr Khan could not have known what a firestorm his words at the Democratic Convention would create. The father of an Iraqi war veteran killed in 2004 drew Donald Trump's ire with his remarks. Trump even took aim at Khan's wife, saying she had nothing to say. She probably maybe wasn't allowed to have anything to say. Ghazala Khan had a lot to say about that.
My religion or my family or my culture never stopped me saying whatever I want to say.
This is a proof of his ignorance and arrogance.
Some prominent Republicans like Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan are distancing themselves from Trump's comments, the latest in a series of controversies that have yet to dissuade most of Trump's voters. Senator John McCain blasted Trump in a very personal statement and praised Captain Humayun Khan's service, saying, quote, "I cannot emphasize enough how deeply I disagree with Mr. Trump's statement." But so far, no Republican lawmaker has withdrawn support of the candidate. Veterans of foreign wars released a statement bashing Trump, saying, quote, "To ridicule a Gold Star mother is out of bounds." Trump has since called Captain Khan a hero on Twitter, but has not apologized for his comments. Lauren Ashburn, EWTN News Nightly.
And President Obama did not mention Donald Trump by name, but he did criticize him for attacking the Khan family.
As Commander-in-Chief, I'm pretty tired of some folks trash-talking America's military and troops.
The president addressed the Disabled American Veterans Conference in Atlanta. He says no one has given more for our freedom and our security than our Gold Star families. Hillary Clinton's running mate says he doesn't agree with her stance on abortion, but Tim Kaine tells CNN he'll support her position. Clinton wants to repeal the Hyde Amendment, which blocks federal funds from being used to pay for abortions. Kaine, the Catholic, says he still supports the Hyde Amendment. That drew jeers from the pro-abortion group NARAL. Pro-life groups criticize Senator Kaine's voting record on life issues. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The U.S. military launches airstrikes today against ISIS targets in Libya, a new front in the war on terror. The Pentagon says it's trying to support local troops on the ground.
I think what this heralds is, as we've said for some time, the most important thing to addressing the threat of ISIL in Libya was the formation of the government. And we've seen that now. The GNA has made significant progress, and we've seen their forces on the ground make significant progress against ISIL.
The U.S. has no immediate plans to deploy ground troops in Libya. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warns pregnant women not to travel to the so-called Zika transmission area in Florida. The CDC says pregnant women who live there should take steps to prevent mosquito bites and sexual spread of the virus. Governor Rick Scott says Florida has 10 new infections likely transmitted by mosquitoes. That brings the state's total Zika cases to 14. Watch this dramatic rescue caught on camera. People formed a human chain to save a woman from Saturday's flash flood in Ellicott City, Maryland. One of the rescuers, briefly swept away by the rushing water, is okay tonight. The woman in the car was pulled to safety. The flash flood killed at least 2 people. Maryland's governor declared a state of emergency. Investigators believe a hot air balloon struck power lines before bursting into flames and crashing in central Texas. 16 people on board, including a newlywed couple, were killed. There were reports of fog in the area at the time of the crash. The National Transportation Safety Board says it has recovered more than a dozen electronic devices, iPads, cell phones, cameras. It plans to review them for clues to the cause of that crash. Video reportedly shows a Russian military helicopter shot down over Syria. All 5 crew members were killed. It's the Russian military's deadliest single incident since it entered Syria's civil war. The transport helicopter went down in rebel territory. There are no immediate claims of responsibility. There is more evidence of the growing refugee crisis in Europe. Spain says it rescued 84 migrants trying to cross the Mediterranean. The Spanish Red Cross says the migrants from 4 different boats were brought to the port of Almeria. Pope Francis wraps up his 5-day apostolic visit to Poland for World Youth Day. The pilgrimage marks his first ever visit to Eastern Europe. Organizers estimate 1.5 million young people attended the Holy Father's closing Mass in a meadow near Krakow. Many of them camped out in sleeping bags after a vigil the night before. Pope Francis looked well after taking a fall at a Mass earlier in the trip. He echoed the message of his predecessor, Polish native St. John Paul II.
Non abbiate timore.
Do not be afraid, he said.
Una nuova umanità.
He encourages the hundreds of thousands of young people to believe in a new humanity, one that refuses to use borders as barriers and rejects hatred. The Pope urged a new generation to work for peace, reconciliation, and justice.
I feel more open and my heart was being softened, and to hear that the Pope was talking straight to the young people really touched me, and it really resonates with what I want to do as a Catholic.
Security was extremely tight throughout the visit, but Francis encountered huge crowds day after day without incident and arrived back home in Rome safely Sunday evening.
Muchas gracias por esta compañía, por este acercarse a despedirme.
From Poland, Pope Francis says he won't label Islam as terrorist because it would be unfair and untrue.
Credo che non è giusto.
The Holy Father was asked by reporters why he doesn't refer to Islam when describing terrorism or other violence. His comments coming just days after extremists cut the throat of an elderly priest celebrating Mass in a church in Normandy, France. EWTN senior contributor Dr. Matthew Bunson is with us. What's behind the Pope's approach to this really fired up issue?
Yeah, well, we need to understand that Pope Francis is looking at a situation in Europe that is incendiary, to put it mildly. Yeah. He is facing a situation where not only do you have a crisis of anxiety and fear, but you also have nationalist parties and you have potential radicals on the move. So Francis is trying to keep the situation calm, but he's also making an effort to reach out to moderates, not just in Europe, but elsewhere. He referenced on the plane specifically the imam who's in charge of the Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which is one of those areas where he's finding a partner in peace. And I think he's trying to build as well on the progress they're making. Look at the response, for example, to the murder of Father Amel. Yeah. Muslims all over France are going to Mass.
All over Europe they went to Mass.
As an act of solidarity.
With Catholics on Sunday. So do you think the Holy Father will be able to calm some of this fear with these words, this approach?
I think that's his plan. We're going to see if it works. The problem is that if more attacks continue, it's going to be harder and harder for voices like Pope Francis's to keep the reaction calm as it has been. And there could as well be a political explosion if attacks continue in Germany and France and elsewhere.
In that in-flight news conference, he also talked about the allegations that involve Cardinal Pell, who's a very high figure in the Vatican.
Yeah, Cardinal Pell, George Pell of Australia, is in charge of the Secretariat for the Economy. He's also the point man, one of the key figures in Pope Francis's financial reform of the whole of the Vatican. So the accusation that he is somehow now directly involved in sexual abuse is a rather severe one. Cardinal Pell has reacted very strongly to the accusation, absolutely rejecting any notion of it and pointing to the fact that authorities have yet even to interview him.
What did the Holy Father say?
Well, the Holy Father is being very careful with this. He's telling us not to rush to judgment. He's doing this exactly right. He's following the protocol that exists in the Church, that you're not guilty until you're proven guilty. But at the same time, he's trying not to bias the media reports on this. He wants the investigation to Cardinal Pell to be fair, to be objective, and then we'll go from there.
So after his fall in Czestochowa before Mass, did he talk about that?
He did. Pope Francis had one of those classic comments that Pope Francis likes to make. I won't say that he blamed the Blessed Mother, because that's not accurate, but he said that he was focused very heavily on the image of Our Lady of Czestochowa and missed the fact that while he was carrying a thurible, which weighed a great deal.
It's a big one.
A big thurible, yeah. He went down the step. And he did it right for a man with severe back problems. He allowed himself to fall very gently. If you look at the video, they were able to get him up, and he proceeded without any harm.
And he's okay?
He's okay.
No problem.
Yeah.
Matthew Bunson, Dr. Bunson, thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be with you.
Coming up, a familiar face at the Vatican. Father Lombardi begins a new chapter after 10 years of speaking for the Pope. And Muslims attend Mass showing solidarity with Catholics following the killing of a French priest. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening, August 1st. I'm Brian Patrick. A new chapter begins today for the Vatican Press Office. St. Louis native Greg Burke succeeds Jesuit Father Federico Lombardi, who served the church for a decade. Mary Shovlin reports from Rome.
Father Federico Lombardi is stepping down after 10 years as director of the Holy See Press Office and papal spokesman. He's 73 years old. He comes from the northern part of Italy, and he was trained as a mathematician, but they appointed him director of programs at Vatican Radio in 1991. He was also added to his duties was that of Vatican Television Center back in 2001, and then Benedict XVI also made him director of the Holy See Press Office. So in all, he has served the Vatican for 25 years in communications. But he's not been retired for very long. I think for just about 5 minutes. He's already taken another job. It was announced today through the Holy See Press Office that he'll be the new chairman of the board of the Ratzinger Foundation. This is a foundation established by Benedict XVI back in 2006 in order to promote theological studies and the sciences. So a new development for Father Lombardi. He's being replaced by American journalist Greg Burke, well respected by all of his Vatican colleagues, the first American to hold the position. And by his side will be Deputy Director Paloma Garcia Ovejero. The two of them together are seen as a new, fresh step in this ongoing reform of the Vatican communications. In Rome, Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mary. This is really interesting. Muslims attend Sunday Mass across Europe, showing solidarity with Catholics after last week's deadly church attack in France. In Rome's Basilica of Santa Maria Trastevere, 2 imams joined a Catholic priest for Mass. Father Federico Menzuele says living peacefully with people of different faiths is possible. One of the imams called for more intense Islamic-Catholic dialogue. In Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the faithful paying tribute to Father Jacques Hamel with Muslim leaders present. The attack sent shockwaves through France and the Universal Church. A Syrian refugee and cousin of one of the 2 attackers remains in custody. In Rouen, just a few miles from the church where the 85-year-old priest was killed, Muslims gather at the towering Gothic cathedral. And Munich mourns the victims of the July 22nd shooting when 9 people were killed by a teenage gunman. Chancellor Angela Merkel attended the service at the Frauenkirche Cathedral, the first of 2 memorial events. An 18-year-old German-Iranian man killed 9 people, wounding more than 30 others at a McDonald's restaurant and shopping mall. He then killed himself. The attacker was described as a loner who had been treated for depression and other psychiatric problems. Poland marks the 72nd anniversary of the start of the Warsaw Uprising. The struggle against Nazi Germany in 1944 lasted 63 days, ending tragically for the Poles. Commemorations are held throughout Poland today. The Warsaw Uprising was the largest act of resistance by any nation under World War II Nazi occupation. The heroism of the insurgents remains a defining element in Polish national identity. The Germans put the rebellion down brutally, destroying most of Warsaw, killing around 200,000 people, mainly civilians. Dr. Victoria Barnett directs the programs on ethics, religion, and the Holocaust at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. How might we honor the memory of these thousands who gave their lives to oppose the Nazi regime?
Yeah, I think their stories are often little told in terms of the civilian populations that rose up against the Nazis. And it's an important part of the history. It's something that links them to the broader resistance across Europe during that period. There weren't enough people like that, but their actions are all the more remarkable. And I think that understanding that aspect of the history is an important part of understanding the larger history of the Holocaust.
We cannot forget, and Pope Francis certainly visiting Auschwitz and Birkenau over the weekend. What impact does that have to remind people?
Yeah, I think his visit was quite remarkable. He met both with survivors of the Holocaust, Jewish survivors of Auschwitz, as well as some of the righteous of the nations, the Polish civilians who rescued or hid Jews. And that act of reconciliation, if you will, his reaching out to both communities in that moment and visiting Auschwitz this time, I think, in a different, we live in different times. His visit was quite different from that of his predecessors, John Paul II and Benedict. He didn't make a large public statement, but he went deeply into prayer and obviously was silent. And it shows, I think, the importance, the ongoing importance of memorializing the Holocaust and truly understanding what happened in places like Auschwitz.
It was chilling for me. My own Jewish great-grandmother may have died there or in another concentration camp. We last heard from her in Holland. Her daughter did. So it's really something that we cannot forget. And with the racial tensions and all kinds of tensions in this country, what can we learn from that that would help us now maybe?
Well, that's a large question. I would put that in a larger perspective. You just showed some of the violence that's happening across Europe, the rise of right-wing groups, the rise of anti-Semitism, the rise of violence against people of all faiths, the terrible murder of the French priest. That we seem to be living in a time where there's a great deal more to polarize us and more acts of this kind of violence and racism. The museum tries to get people to think about that. We show a very specific history, the persecution of the Jews and the rise of anti-Semitism, but that opens the door for people to think more in depth, I think, about these larger issues.
And quickly, tell us about America and the Holocaust.
We have a new exhibit, a temporary exhibit we're planning to open in 2018 on America and the Holocaust. One of the things we're doing right now is a crowdsourcing exercise across the United States. We're inviting especially high school and college students to look at their local papers. I personally would love to see people look at their parochial papers or religious publications to see what was being reported during that era. They're sending them to the museum. We're posting them online. We now have hundreds, perhaps a couple thousand stories from that era that really show what the Holocaust looked like from the perspective of the ordinary American during that time.
We'll have you back to talk more about that. Dr. Victoria Barnett with the Holocaust Museum of the the Holocaust Memorial Museum here in D.C.
Thanks very much.
It. Thank you. Up next, the growing fight over so-called bathroom bills and the redefinition of marriage. And days before the Olympics, serious concerns about a health threat on Brazil beaches. On this Monday, August 1st, we celebrate Redemptorist founder St. Alphonsus Liguori. A brilliant theologian, he wrote poetry and composed beautiful hymns like O God of Loveliness. He died in the late 18th century. He was 90 at the time. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. 3 states wrestle with gender issues. In North Carolina, a judge must decide if the state can require transgender people to use bathrooms corresponding with their gender at birth. In California, lawmakers consider a bill challenging the way religious colleges and universities assign housing to gay and transgender students. It could change anti-discrimination laws, potentially exposing schools to civil rights lawsuits. And in Illinois, a gay music director is allowed to sue a Catholic parish for firing him after publicizing his engagement to a same-sex partner. Brian Brown, president of the National Organization for Marriage, is with us, along with Penny Nance, CEO and president of Concerned Women for America. Penny, what would you say is a common sense approach to this whole transgender issue?
Well, I think the key in that phrase is the word common sense. Unfortunately, we've come to a point where we've ignored common sense and are held captive by feelings. I come at this as the head of Concerned Women for America. We have about 500,000 women who are members across this country, and I also come at it as a crime victim. I'm a woman who was assaulted physically and a man attempted to rape me, and it's a long story. I write about it in my book, Feisty and Feminine, A Rallying Cry for Conservative Women. But it brings me to the fact that there are serious safety issues at risk here. And I'm not talking about someone who's dealing with gender confusion. I'm talking about the 850,000 sexual predators that are on our national registry who will use any excuse, any advantage to access innocent women and children. And when we ignore that there's safety issues, there's modesty and moral issues that women and children deal with when we're talking about bathrooms and we're talking about travel in schools and we're talking about locker rooms, then we've ignored common sense and we need to come back to our senses.
So Brian, looking back at the Supreme Court ruling that legally redefines marriage, how has that permeated the state level and even local levels when it comes to these kinds of laws and ordinances?
Well, the fact is that the Supreme Court put a falsehood into the law, that there's no distinction between husband and wife, mother and father. And once you erase the reality, the biological reality of husband and wife, you don't have to go too far to erase the biological reality of male and female altogether. And that's the point we're at. We're at a point where you're actually having laws and courts undermine the truth of what we are as human beings and actually actively work to punish the churches, individuals, and organizations who still stand for the truth that there's some distinction between male and female.
I was amazed to hear the emphasis on family at the Democratic National Convention. In the meantime, all these other issues that seem, do you think that the idea of family and family values is really eroded in our culture today?
Well, we have come to a point where there's economic issues at stake here. About 40% of our kids are born out of wedlock. And in the Republican platform, they talk specifically about the fact that children need a mom and a dad. We have, decades of social science that tell us that, God set it up that way for a reason. It's better for parents to get married, stay married, raise their children together, and to show God's love to the world through their marriage.
But how can we show tolerance and love but still stick to our values?
Well, standing up for the truth, standing up for the beauty of God's creation is love. Mm-hmm. That is love. And we have to do it in a loving way, but that doesn't mean that we're silenced. And so we need to be active in supporting true religious liberty, supporting the reality that marriage is based on the union of a man and a woman. And the fact that some people may not want to hear it doesn't mean that we should ever be silenced.
Brian Brown, Penny Nance, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, a health warning for people traveling to Brazil for the Olympics. A new investigation confirms dangerously high levels of bacteria along popular beaches. Nearly 500,000 tourists are expected to descend on Rio de Janeiro for the Olympic Games starting this week. When they're not watching the competitions, many will hit the world-famous beaches.
If there's a pollution problem, it would be good for tourists to have information about it. But when you look at the water, it looks pretty.
But looks can be deceiving. The latest findings in a 16-month investigation by the Associated Press show that Ipanema and Copacabana beaches are heavily polluted with viruses from human sewage.
We would never see anything close to this level of viruses in Florida.
The methods that they're using...
Valerie Harwood from the University of Southern Florida reviewed the AP's findings.
It definitely is not of the type of water quality where you would want to take your family to the beach necessarily or be exposed long-term to that water.
The beaches even violate Rio's own standards. Andre Coria, Rio's environmental secretary, says he goes in the water and it's fine.
Can you swim at the bay where the sailing competition is going to take place? Yes, you can. I did a dive there. Nature keeps renewing the water.
But water quality experts say locals, like Coria, have developed immunities to the viruses.
Nearly 100% of the people that contact the water will get infected, but getting sick will only happen to some of them, depending on their immunity level.
But for visitors who are not immune, the potential for illness is real.
What they're really at the risk of is gastroenteritis, so for the most part, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea.
Professor Harwood says beachgoers need to be cautious.
I would say don't let your kids eat the sand and don't put your head underwater.
Good solid advice there. And a giant image of Jesus holding the Olympic rings is created in Italy just days before the Summer Games begin in Rio. It depicts the Brazilian city's Christ the Redeemer statue. Italian artist Dario Gambarin used his old tractor to create this field art. It's 5 times larger than that huge statue that towers over Rio. Gambarin has created other iconic images in his fields, including one of Pope Francis. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight looking back at the apostolic journey of Pope Francis to Poland for World Youth Day. Good night. God bless you.